The 1980s was a very interesting time, not only in Japanese history, but in the history of anime. During this decade, there were a large variety of anime being produced, from more experimental projects like Angel's Egg, Robot Carnival, and Manie-Manie Meikyuu Monogatari, to long-running series that weren't only popular in their time, but have managed to remain in the minds of fans to this day. TV series such as Fist of the North Star, Saint Seiya, Macross, and Dragon Ball. This era is so well remembered that it's often referred to as the golden age of anime. Interestingly enough, anime's golden age happens to coincide with what you could call the golden age of the Japanese economy. And that's probably not a coincidence. Today, we'll be taking a look at how the Japanese economy helped to fuel the golden age of anime. First things first, we need to understand what was going on in Japan and the world at the time, and how it stimulated economic growth. Let's start with a very broad overview of how the 1980s economic boom began and progressed. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution and the following war with Iraq triggered an oil shortage.
Government economists are saying tonight that the OPEC increases today can be expected to add a full percentage point to the cost of living this year.
In order to combat this, Japan, alongside other industrialized nations, lowered their interest rates. These low interest rates made it easier for people to borrow money, which, alongside other economic policies, contributed to Japan's large investments into research and development. This helped to stimulate large industrial industries like steel, automotive, and shipbuilding, which led to more jobs and higher salaries for the average Japanese citizen. It also helped out Japan's already large consumer electronics industry. In the 80s, Japan was a leader in several categories, including semiconductors, memory chips, and televisions. In 1985, Japan, the United States, France, West Germany, and the United Kingdom met in the Plaza Hotel in New York City to sign an agreement that would become known as the Plaza Accord. The purpose of this agreement was to lower the price of the US dollar in comparison to the Japanese yen, French franc, British pound, and German mark. In order to do this, the Bank of Japan sold their dollar reserves in order to increase the price of the yen and lower the price of the dollar. By doing this, the purchasing power of the average Japanese consumer was increased because they can now afford to buy more foreign goods. The Bank of Japan responded by lowering their interest rates even further. That made money even easier to come by, which allowed companies and individuals to access even more capital to reinvest. And one of the places that some of these companies chose to invest in was the anime industry. The Japanese economy flourished in the 1980s with an average growth rate of 4.3% per year, higher than the United States and European Union countries. Japan's GDP per capita increased from $2,056 in 1970 to $9,463 in 1980 to an 80s high of $25,059 in 1988. With all of that being said, how did all of this really impact the life and perspective of the average Japanese citizen, particularly in the entertainment space? This is Dr. Raina Dennison, professor in film and digital arts at the University of Bristol.
In Japan in the 1980s, we see a huge boom in post-war recovery. So Japan is building massively, so suburbanization is really taking off. There's huge building projects that are going right through the countryside. You've got also a huge kind of increase in leisure facilities and leisure money and less time, but more money. So we see a kind of massive growth in the same period of kind of home entertainment technologies from video and then into DVD in the 1990s. But we also see, of course, the rise of all kinds of entertainment-related technologies, from pachinko parlors, which become hugely popular across the 80s and 90s, into video game parlors and those kinds of changes that happen as well around the video game. But I think more broadly as well, it's a period of real confidence for Japan in that 1980s period. So we see in terms of politics and philosophy, the rise of the Nihonjinron kind of writings that looked at trying to create a better sense of a place for Japan in the post-war world. So you get things like books like The Japan That Can Say No, and a kind of real assertion of confidence around Japan's place in the world in the 1980s as well. And that in its turn leads to a kind of waves of reactionary waves from other countries where they were concerned about Japan's rising power in the global economy. And you get in the 1990s then kind of from the 80s into the 90s something called the Japan Panic, which was a kind of very negative knee-jerk response to Japan's economic success and kind of confidence in the world market.
Side note, the Japan panic was visible very early in the decade. While Japan had been the world's third largest economy since the 1970s, behind the United States and the Soviet Union, its rapid growth and increasing exports had large economies like the US worried. For example, in 1981, President Ronald Reagan placed a limit on the number of cars that Japan could export to the United States. This was enacted after American automakers lobbied for protectionist policies following a rough 2 years of business. The American automotive industry had been struggling since the previously mentioned 1979 oil crisis. The crisis slowed the economy's growth, which caused consumers to tighten their budgets. And rising oil prices pushed consumers who were interested in buying a new car towards smaller, cheaper, and more fuel-efficient vehicles, which happened to be the kinds of cars that Japanese automakers were exporting. These events hit American automakers and their employees hard. Between January 1979 and July 1980, the motor vehicle and equipment industry lost 335,000 jobs. While there was a brief resurgence in the following months, between June 1981 and November 1982, another 185,000 jobs were lost. Many people in places heavily affected by these job cuts, like in automotive industrial centers like Detroit, Michigan, blamed Japan.
By 1982, 1 in 5 Detroit residents were out of a job.
It's few and far between. Jobs are hard to come by. How about you? You hiring?
The only thing I can say is move somewhere else.
Suddenly, after a lifetime of well-paying jobs where they could afford a house, 2 cars, a recreational vehicle, a summer cottage, suddenly it was wiped out.
The only answer is charity.
People became destitute. The frustration turned into anger. People want to know, why is this happening to me? Who can I blame? In the beginning, the workers blamed the companies. Factories blamed the workers. The politicians blamed each other. And in the end, they kind of all reached a consensus. Let's blame Japan.
But this anti-Japanese sentiment also manifested itself in other ways. As mentioned previously, Japanese companies had plenty of money to invest, and some of them decided to invest in foreign companies. Between 1981 and 1988, Japan invested an estimated $93.7 billion in foreign markets, particularly in the United States. And generally speaking, these investments came in the form of acquisitions, meaning that during the 80s, there were some popular American businesses being bought by Japanese companies. One of the responses to this, and other socioeconomic factors at the time, was a large amount of anti-Japanese sentiment and Japanophobia. We've covered the general economic conditions of Japan, but how did they affect the anime industry? And what set the stage for the growth that it would see during the decade?
Starting really in the 1970s, what we see is the very beginnings of conglomeration. Kadokawa Publishing, and it's often the big publishing houses that start to conglomerate in the 70s. But Kadokawa Publishing is one of the first to start doing something that is now known as the media mix. And so the media mix is about the exploitation of IP. So what they would do is at Kadokawa, they would maybe have a book that they're publishing that they would adapt into a film, but they'd also be the representative for the singers who are doing the theme songs. And so you'd have a CD, a book, and a film coming out from the same company. And that is something that really takes off into what we now see as this massively dispersed understanding of the media mix, where a publisher will get together with all kinds of different companies to make sure that they make the most out of their manga and anime assets. So that's a huge thing that happens across the kind of 1970s into the 1990s, and it's still in operation now. What I think is really notable is those big publishing companies start to invest in anime studios. So famously, Studio Ghibli is owned by, or starts out being owned by, Tokuma Publishing. And Tokuma in this period is looking at film just the same way Kadokawa had been before, and they're trying to use their assets in publishing to create these franchises that would go from adaptations from books and manga into live action film or animation. But at the same time, they start to invest in some of these more independent studios like Studio Ghibli, who are doing their own productions and doing their own original films. So yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of companies starting out in the 1970s and 1980s as offshoots from other companies.
So, other than more money flowing in than ever before, what were the contributing factors to anime's explosive rise in popularity in the 80s? In order to get another perspective, I reached out to someone who's familiar with anime from this era.
My name is Jason. I write under the name Rowan on the 90sanime.com anime blog, and I write specifically about 90s anime. There are a lot of factors that went into that. I think if you're trying to boil it down, there are two primary factors that I see that led to this. If you go back to the mid 70s, you had shows like Space Battleship Yamato that ditched the episodic format that was popular at the time with a lot of other cartoons and anime. And they went to an overarching story that meant you had to watch every episode or you were lost. There was also a shift to more mature and complicated storylines that made anime more appealing to teenagers and young adults. And the second component, which I think probably plays a bigger role in this, is the growing popularity of the VCR in the early 80s. This made anime accessible to a wider audience because it was now possible to purchase and duplicate anime and watch it anytime you want. And also this facilitated the advent of OVAs, and they were released direct to VHS.
The first video cassette recorder, or VCR, to play VHS or video home system tapes was JVC's Victor HR3300, which went on sale in Japan on October 31st, 1976. By the end of the year, 40,000 homes had a VCR, and things just took off from there. According to a 1982 survey by the Japanese government's Economic Planning Agency, the VCR was the third most popular consumer electronic, trailing only audio cassette players and the televisions themselves. Just a year later, 1 in 3 television households had a VCR, which was around 8.9 million homes. By 1989, nearly 2/3, or 65.4% to be exact, of Japanese television households had a VCR, which was around 24.2 million homes. This made Japan the world's second largest video market. The late 80s also saw the rise of the Japanese rental industry, which peaked in 1988 and was serviced by several small independent video rental stores.
Yeah, when you look at what came out in the 1980s, you had movies such as Akira, Nausicaa, Grave of the Fireflies, and shows like Macross and Dragon Ball that were growing in popularity. So it's pretty easy to see why people would consider the 80s to be the golden age of anime. And this is also when Studio Ghibli formed, and there was at the time a general emphasis on improving the quality of both animation and storytelling in the industry. And in addition to this, with the increasing popularity of anime at the time, there were larger budgets for anime productions, and studios were more supportive of experimental films. And this is how you came to find shows or movies such as Angel's Egg and Wings of Onamis.
Fueled by economic prosperity and advances in technology, the 1980s were a perfect storm for growth and creativity in the anime industry. But just like every golden age, periods of economic growth don't last forever. Although no one's sure what will cause it, when it will take place, or how severe it will be, at some point or another, there will be a crash.